The first thing we'll want to do to deploy our new virtual machine, we're going to deploy a Windows 10 virtual machine. First thing we're going to want to do is to upload the ISO to our hosts. The CD ISO we'll attach to a virtual machine and boot that to install the operating system. So what we'll do is go to Data Stores and select our data store. We'll create a folder called ISOs. Go into that and we'll say upload files. And you'll see here I've got a Windows 10 installation ISO there. So we'll open that. Oh, that upload. Now, what usually happens here is we see an error appear. And it looks like it's not going to show us that error. Yes, it is now uploading. You may see an error when you're trying to do this in your own labs. I've already done this in a previous iteration of this as a test. What happens is when you try to upload the ISO, the vCentre client in the background connects directly to the host from your web browser. And because of that certificate error, that fails. So if you do see that error, it tells you exactly what to do in that error message. Just open up the ESX host that it tells you to and click the button to accept the certificate, then retry the upload. So we'll let that file upload and then we'll get this virtual machine built. With that file uploaded, we're going to need to go and create our virtual machine. So we click on Hosts and Clusters, right click on one of our hosts and say New Virtual Machine. We'll select New Virtual Machine and go Next. Give the virtual machine a name. We'll just go with W10 for simplicity. Select the host we're going to put it on, which is our second host, and select the data store on which we're going to store it. Now the ESX compatibility mode, so this is going to be compatible with all ESX hosts version 7 or later. That's fine for us, all of our hosts are version 7, but if you're in the middle of a migration, perhaps you've got some older hosts that you might need to move this VM to, you might want to select a different version in this drop down, so you can do so. Now I need to tell it what the guest operating system is, and this will help it pre-select a couple of settings for us. And now we get to the resource screen. So we've specified 2 cores in total, and it is going to make 2 cores and 1 socket. If we'd selected 4 cores total on that top line, it might have done 2 sockets and 2 cores on each socket, or it may have simply done 1 socket with 4 cores on each socket. Under the hard disk here, we have a couple of options to look at briefly. Obviously, we've got the size there, and further down we have the location. So that will default to store with virtual machine. That will use the data store that we selected on the previous step further up there. So we can override that per disk. So you might want a data disk that's on one data store and an OS disk on this data store, etc., etc. We also have here disk provisioning. This is the thick or thin setting for the disk. So this is exactly the same as the thin disk mode we saw when we deployed the vCentre. However, we have an extra couple of options. Thick provision lazy zeroed will effectively create the start and the end of the disk, but will not format the part in the middle. So this virtual disk may contain fragments of data from other files that have been stored on the data store previously. Thick provision eager zeroed will overwrite the entire virtual disk that we are creating with zeros before it allows us to use it. Thick provision lazy zeroed will be available for us to use pretty much straight away, but thick provision eager zeroed will require us to wait until that eager zeroing process has been completed. This is of course similar to a quick format versus a full format on an operating system such as Windows. Eager zeroed can improve performance for the first write because lazy zeroed disks, before we write to a given sector on the virtual disk, we have to zero it out first. So this can add a little bit of latency the first time we write to a given sector on that disk. Of course, this is also similar to a quick format versus a full format in terms of that small performance impact on the first write. Then we have the networks that we are going to connect this virtual machine to. We'll look at creating those later on. But for now, the only thing we need to worry about is setting the virtual CD drive. So we're going to go and select the ISO file that we already uploaded. And something to watch out for, I fall for this every time, make sure connect at power on is ticked. Otherwise you start your virtual machine and it tells you that you don't have any boot devices and you start wondering why. I fall for that every single time. I end up having to go in there and tick connect there after the VM has started. So that's all for in here for now. So we're going to go ahead and say finish, and that's now creating our virtual machine. We can go and start it up, turn power it on, and then we'll take a look at its console. So we can click launch remote console, or we can use a HTML5 console within the web console itself. If you want to use that remote console, you need to click that download and install remote console button there, and we get this boot menu from the virtual machine. So we're going to select our virtual CD drive, and now the Windows 10 installation is starting, just like it would if this was a physical machine, if we were installing this on a laptop or desktop or a server for that matter. Of course, Windows 10 installation isn't really in scope for a VMware course, so we'll leave that there for now. I'll complete the installation, and in the next lecture we'll take a look at the installation of the VMware driver package, which is VMware Tools.